What's it take to become a YouTube star? Why would you want to, and can you make money from it? You're listening to Queer Money episode number 222. Today we're talking about how to use YouTube to grow your brand, strengthen your personal voice, and yes, even make money. We're joined by Jacob Michael of the YouTube channel Jacob Michael. Jacob started his channel about a year and a half ago and has already nearly 22,000 followers. Jacob's videos discuss being gay in 2020 in America, from topics that cover first date advice to hairstyles for receding hairlines to body shaming in the gay community. Jacob has a lot of insight in making content on YouTube and making an impact. We make the Queer Money podcast for you, so please email your money questions to questions@debtfreeguys.com or post them in the Queer Money Facebook group, and we may answer your question in an upcoming episode.
There's personal finance for the masses. This is not personal finance for the masses. This is Queer Money.
This podcast is sponsored by Capital One. Capital One is redesigning the banking experience by offering simple, straightforward, and seamless ways for you to bank from almost anywhere. So banking fits into your life, not the other way around.
Find out why the Debt Lasso method is a better way than the snowball or avalanche method for paying off your credit card debt by getting your free Debt Lasso calculator at debtlasso.com. Now, on with the show. And welcome Jacob Michael to the show. We're excited to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, we've been watching your YouTube channel for the last couple of months, and we appreciate that you did a small little feature of our Gay Cities article to help provide some content or resource for people to figure out where they might want to consider moving that sort of outside of the typical gay bubble. Your YouTube channel has a lot of very insightful information from a gay perspective for the LGBT community, and I think it's helping tons of people. What exactly inspired you to start a YouTube channel?
So I think originally when I started it, I was kind of wanting just to do like vlogging or just kind of videos, just kind of more for fun, just kind of as a hobby. Mm-hmm. And so I originally and I don't have any of these videos up anymore, but originally I was doing kind of just all over the place vlogs, just as kind of an outlet and something to do. And then I kind of just scrapped that for a while and decided I didn't really want to do it. And then I had a couple of just, I don't know if you want to call them like conflicts or sort of like things that came up in my personal life with some of my friends in Seattle, the city I live in. And they're conflicts that I felt like came up pretty frequently with, my friends in that circle. And I ended up kind of separating from those friends after a while, just because it ended up being pretty toxic. And it kind of just got me thinking, I was like, why is it that I struggle so much to fit into kind of like the quote unquote gay community, right? And I don't like to say gay community too much because I know it's not a homogenous group at all, but I was just kind of thinking like, I don't know why I struggle so much to fit into some of these circles of people. So I kind of started off by just making these sort of like quippy videos about Grindr, just as a starting point, because I had a lot of frustrations with using that app as well. And then it kind of just turned into sort of this channel where I talked about, I don't know, just like issues that I felt like I was seeing kind of in the quote unquote gay community that I just didn't feel like were talked about or that were really glazed over. And so, I guess the reason I started making videos in the way that I'm making them now, a lot of it just sprung from kind of interpersonal issues I was having, like dating people, having issues there, but also having some issues with some of the friends that I was surrounding myself with at the time.
I think that's interesting and very insightful. A lot of folks, when they start either a hobby or a business, it's related to something that they have some experience with, or in some cases really want to investigate and learn more about. And you kind of, I think, touch on two topics here that are really important for the LGBT community. And especially, it seems to me, with gay men. But there's this whole idea of acceptance, and that's what we all want. We're all seeking acceptance. And for many in the LGBT community, acceptance they've often found themselves sitting on the outside of the circle of acceptance in many cases, or most of their life. And then there's this idea of being inside the circle of acceptance can sometimes be toxic or worse than being on the outside of the circle. And so you excuse yourself from being on the inside of the circle. And it's not uncommon to hear people say that they're giving up on something that's toxic. And oftentimes they homogenize it, as you use those words, the gay community. And so they just excuse themselves from the gay community.
Right. No, I definitely agree with that. And I think like, there's kind of this phenomenon, online. I've heard it with kind of like, women more often, this whole phenomenon of like, not like other girls, right? Like there's this kind of idea online. And I think that you also see that same sort of phenomenon with gay people now. It's like not like other gays, where, you have sort of what people sort of talk about is like what you said, this homogenous gay community. And then you have the people that, separate themselves from that for one reason or another. And I think it's a tricky issue too, because it's like, on the one hand, I think that there are really valid reasons, I think, to be critical of certain things in the gay community. But on the other hand, kind of like you said, it's like you can't, it's a diverse group of people, and you obviously can't kind of write them off as all being the same, or kind of, remove the individual experience of each person in that group, because, everyone's going to be different. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. You have to be careful when you talk about those things. And yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you kind of have to walk on eggshells sometimes when you're talking about them. But I think why I resonated with your channel is because you are talking about some of the topics that the community as a whole isn't talking about, or you have a different perspective than seems to be what's pervasive throughout the community. Maybe I think what we're talking about is that it seems to be that publicly there are these stereotypes of how we're supposed to look, act, dress, what we're supposed to talk about, what we're supposed to be interested in, how we're supposed to vote. And to your point, we're not a completely homogenous community, and then there are those of us who are kind of stepping outside of that circle. And so maybe that's where the inspiration of the content is coming from, is trying to provide something different so that maybe people can see or resonate with a different perspective.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think that is a big inspiration for the content, because I think, yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of the issues that I have kind of chosen to talk about, I haven't seen a lot of, at least, videos that talk about them, right? I occasionally will see articles that talk about them, and I'll see people post about them on like Reddit a little bit. But yeah, I agree. I mean, it's definitely not something that's talked about, I feel like, in the mainstream within kind of, gay culture, quote unquote. So yeah, I think that's kind of a good way of looking at it too. And I think that is kind of another reason that I wanted to make the channel, just because for me personally, I've always had this kind of sense of like, okay, well, I feel like sometimes I've been kind of sitting on the periphery of, like heteronormative culture, just like, normal day-to-day culture, right? But then it's like, I found my people, like gay people, but then it's like, there's this, this mainstream conversation about things that maybe I don't relate to all of them, but then also there's like a mainstream part of it too that is, at least for me personally, like feels like it might be a little bit toxic, I guess you could say. So yeah, for sure.
It's kind of funny because I think for all of us, no matter who we are, what, if for lack of a better term, label that we end up putting on ourselves or others put on us, that there's always this kind of constantly moving Venn diagram of where we overlap with all of the different aspects of life, right? Where do you overlap socioeconomically? Where do you overlap politically? Where do you overlap with your gender identification, your sexual orientation, where you live in the country, what kind of things you actually enjoy in life? And because of that constant movement or trying to figure out where things overlap, we can sometimes feel frustrated that it's hard for us to find other people like ourselves, or hard for us to get across what we're really trying to say sometimes, because people are constantly judging us. Well, you're not a part of my overlap, right? And so that's partly where maybe the toxicity comes from, and partly where the desire and the need for acceptance comes from, that we want to be a part of that. I think that really, that wasn't necessarily the direction that this podcast was going, but I think one of the things that we've hit on here is that sometimes our experiences in life, or the things that we want out of life, can become a motivator for us to actually do something that is creative.
For sure.
And, we see a lot of people in the LGBT community who are wanting to be creative. They're wanting to do something, but they just don't know where to start, right? Or maybe they have an idea of where they want to start. And that's kind of the reason why we wanted to have you on the podcast, is to talk about this idea of how you got started with this. You have a YouTube channel that has nearly 22,000 followers at the time of this recording. You have videos that have had hundreds of thousands of views. So clearly the content that you're putting out there is resonating with some people.
How does your bank support the LGBT community? Not at all? For Pride in June? Or 365 days a year? Capital One proudly supports the LGBT community throughout the year. Maybe it's time to support a bank that supports us. Go to debtfreeguys.com/cafe for more info.
Want to be a part of the $1.7 trillion LGBT business economy? The National LGBT Chamber of Commerce New York is here for you. For your next big contract, mentor, coach, collaborator, and tons of new clients, join us at nglccny.org for the greatest concentration of LGBT and allied business leaders in New York.
So if someone is similar to you, in a similar maybe mindset as you, and they may want to ask, how did you get started? How did you get this? And we know, kind of you said it was this idea of sharing some of your own opinions, but logistically, how did you get started?
Yeah, so I guess logistically, so it obviously kind of depends on sort of the medium that you're trying to create within, but for YouTube, like I started off just filming on my phone. And so I had my phone, I used my camera, I would record. And one of the things I thought was interesting when I started filming was that I was actually not that great in front of the camera at first. And, you always imagine, right? Like you always kind of imagine yourself like filming a video and being like, oh, I'm going to say this, that, and the other. I've got all these ideas. But then when you actually are filming, even though it's just you in the room and your camera, like you're super nervous and you don't know what to say. And you're kind of picturing like what people are going to think. And also there's the other aspect of that is, the post-production. No, not post-production. It's like the post-filming part of creating a video, which is editing, right? And I think part of that nervousness is you're not, you don't totally realize the power of editing and how easy it is to make yourself sound a bit smarter than maybe you sound in the raw footage, right? And so I think that, for me, like, I guess logistically, I kind of just had to use what I had. So I used my iPhone camera. I got like a subscription to Adobe Premiere just to edit the stuff. And I just started learning. I personally, I really love learning that kind of stuff. So I thought it was really fun. But then in terms of, I guess, logistically can mean a lot of things. So that's kind of the very practical, like technical stuff is, don't try to go out of your way, I guess, to buy a bunch of new stuff. Try to create with what you have. And then, as you improve and you need more stuff, just, expand your supplies and your tools and everything you're using. But then there's also kind of logistically in terms of just like the fear, like the psychology of actually creating, and especially when it's creating and then sharing it online, because, if you're creating something and sharing it online, there's the expectation, at least if it's reasonably successful, that, people will see it, right? People are going to see it. They'll respond to it. You'll see how they respond to it. And there's the fear of like, well, what if I make this and people don't care, or they disagree and they just really don't like it? And for that, I don't know, like overcoming that fear, I feel like was really hard. Like there are several videos I created early on where I posted them. I had, maybe 4 or 5 nice comments and then like one just really mean, vitriolic comment. And I just deleted the video because it was like, oh, this is wrong. I got this wrong. Right. And so I think over time you kind of have to just develop this sense of like this like inner core, I guess, of like, my perspective matters, where I'm coming from matters. Like people might not always agree with it, but like at the end of the day, like I have to, and obviously if you don't agree with something you post, you can take it down. You realize, oh, that was a mistake. But like, I think it's also, that's another component of it, right? Is developing that sort of inner core of like, this is who I am. Like, not everyone's going to like it, but I just have to like accept that people, someone is going to dislike it. That's almost guaranteed, right? And so I think that's almost like a good mindset to have going into it. If you're, I think it's Brene Brown that talks about being in the arena and getting your ass kicked or whatever. It's like if you can't go into the arena without people, throwing punches. Like you just have to know that that's part of it. And I think for me, that has been really helpful to kind of view it in that way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, as you're describing your experience, I'm having so many flashbacks because I'm thinking about the first time that we had about 5 years ago, our marketing manager asked us to create this 60-second video. And we're like, oh, that's going to be so easy. We could totally do that. And it was one of the first videos we ever recorded. And we started out and we fumbled a couple times. We were like, you know what? We're a little bit too tense. let's have a little bit of wine. So we had a little bit of wine and we just kept screwing it up. And we kept having more and more wine. And all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, today's wasted. We got to try it again tomorrow. And you would think that doing a 30-second video would be super easy, but it's actually more challenging than you expect. And then you have all this respect for especially reporters who are on the scene while something's happening and how they're able to put something cogent together that's actually valuable for people. And I can also think of the first time that we published our first blog post on debtfreeguys.com forever ago. And I probably paced the living room for about 30, 40 minutes before I actually hit publish, because I was like, what if everybody hates it? What if nobody pays attention to it? And, to your point, I think what we've learned over the last 5 years is kind of what you were talking about, having that inner core, is you kind of have to have a bit of a thick skin, which is something that we didn't necessarily have from the beginning. But to me, that's been part of the benefit of this process, is that it's really kind of given us some thick skin and help us become really confident in what we have to say and how we have to say it, which I think is sort of one of the reasons why we've been encouraging people, LGBT or otherwise, to become full or part-time entrepreneurs, creatives of some sort, because what it does is it helps strengthen your voice. And especially if you've got something unique to say that can provide some value to someone, we don't need more people to continue to say the same thing. We need some people who are ready to kind of disrupt things. And when you're going to disrupt things, you're definitely going to piss some people off, but that's kind of the point, right? You're trying to show a different perspective. We're not homogenous. We're different. And here are some different opinions over here. And if you want to join me, come over here.
Well, right, for sure. Well, and I totally agree with that. And that's a really good point. It's like, if you're going to create something with the intention of creating something, unique, your risk of being criticized and being, quote unquote, punched, if you want to call it that, to use Brené's analogy, it's even higher, right? I mean, you're definitely going to piss people off. You're definitely going to get criticism. And I think another thing too, to kind of think about too is, I mean, even people that maybe don't necessarily consume your content, but people that are in your personal life, right? That know that you're trying this project. I know in my experience, I've had, several people, not several, but a few people in my life who I don't really talk to now, but I remember they straight up told me when they found out I was doing YouTube, they're like, "Oh, that's so embarrassing. You don't I wouldn't tell everybody that you're doing that."
Really?
And I can remember that. Yeah, I can remember. And I mean, it was a couple people. Most people have been incredibly supportive, but there's two distinct cases I could remember that happening. Wow. And I mean, oh my gosh, and that by itself, you're just like, oh gosh, is this just whole, is this whole thing just ridiculous? You just kind of feel that I guess you could call it shame or self-doubt or whatever. But yeah, I mean, just kind of, I think when you can expect those things, I think it does. It doesn't make the emotions less painful maybe, but I think it makes it easier to kind of push through it because it's part of the process. And the other thing too is, regarding, if you are finding that you're nervous or I know this really helped me a lot. Whenever I'm doing videos, I tend to go on tangents. I tend to, talk kind of in a bunch of different directions. And what I found though is that for me, and this worked really well for my channel, is that I can kind of incorporate that into the video itself as kind of improv humor sort of. So you can kind of also use that as part of the way you sort of are creating your stuff. I know that's worked for me. I think it kind of adds a little bit of relatability when you don't edit out all the mistakes and stuff. But obviously that kind of depends on the specific content you're making. But right. Yeah, so I mean that's another thing. I mean, there's a certain struggle that can usually be spun into some sort of strength if you kind of approach it a different way, I guess, when you're creating stuff.
I think when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the saying, and I don't know, I can't remember who to attribute this to, that idea of being perfectly imperfect. Right? Mm-hmm. That we sit down, and you kind of alluded to this when you put the camera up for the first time and you start recording, and you just expect that you're going to make something that is, perfect and amazing, and you realize that it's not. And sometimes it's the imperfections in there that are what make you endearing to an audience, or the imperfection is what actually makes people think about something more than just to watch it for entertainment. But I guess that kind of brings up this idea then, when you got started and you're starting to do these videos, is this really time consuming? I mean, how long does it take you to make some of these videos? Obviously, I think depending on the length of the video, but in general.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really depends. I mean, I think So early on, especially, like I was really engrossed in the process. I just thought it was super fun. So I would spend, I mean, I don't even want to know, like probably like 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week ish.
Wow.
I mean, just depending on the week. And I mean, some weeks would be more, some weeks would be less, but I think some of that was also learning how to edit and how to film and like learning that stuff. I think that kind of slows things down in the beginning, but as you get more experience, that really decreases. But I still spend a fair amount of time. I'd say probably not quite that much as I did in the early stages, but I still spend a fair amount of time per week on videos just because I want to make them better. And now, especially lately, I've been trying to shift my sort of more LGBT and just like social issue related videos kind of towards more of a video essay format where I actually, pretty much script the entire video and sort of make it this really deep dive, like analysis of a topic, like 30, 40 minutes long. And those take a long time, but I don't put those out every week. Those, like, I think my most recent one, that one probably I spent 40 or 50 hours just researching. And then, you have filming and then you have editing, and it was like a 45-minute video. So yeah, it really can depend on the type of video you're making. But yeah, I would say early on, I was spending probably like, I'll say just 20 hours a week on it. And I think now I probably spend like 15 hours a week on it, depending on the week. Some weeks I don't, but yeah.
And so you had, or you still have, a full-time job as well, right?
So I do. Yeah, I do have a full-time job, although I am really thankful because I am currently doing like reduced schedule. So I do like 30 hours a week right now, which is awesome. It's like perfect for me. And that's freed up time for me to do, of course, my YouTube stuff, but also have some semblance of a social life and spend time with my boyfriend and all those different things. So
the important stuff.
Yeah, very important stuff.
So how much money would you say? So you alluded to this earlier that, you don't necessarily need to buy all sorts of brand new equipment, right? Most of us already have a smartphone that has a camera. So most of us kind of have the opportunity to record our own videos, whether they're on TikTok or YouTube or whatever. But how much would you say you've invested in your channel so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me think about that. So every single month, it's kind of changed a little bit. So I ended up buying Final Cut Pro. So that I think was $200 or $300 when I bought that, but there was a one-time purchase. And then the camera, I think I spent about, it was about $900. I think it was like $900 to $1,000 on the camera. It was partially a Christmas gift. So I spent, but yeah, it was $900 to $1,000 was how much it totally costs. And then lights, I think lighting stuff that can cost, it depends on what you get, but probably like $100 to $150 on lighting. Yeah. I mean, I would say in total, I've probably spent like, we'll say like, $1,500 to maybe $2,000 on just all my, on my equipment and editing stuff and just random odds and ends too that I'll occasionally get for the videos. So yeah, it's like $1,500 to $2,000. The nice thing about YouTube is that you can monetize it. So I've fortunately been able to make all of that back from monetizing it now. So like that's really nice. But yeah, so I would say that's about a rough estimate, probably $2,000, we'll say.
That's great. Thank you. I think what you're saying, what you're outlining here, the idea that you don't necessarily need to invest much money initially, if at all, to just get started. And then there are a lot of free resources available, or low cost resources that you can use that may not be, optimal. It's definitely not what they're using in Hollywood, but it's a good start. And then as you're able to monetize your channel, whatever platform that you're on, you can sort of scale up and upgrade to the nicer services and products and cameras and on all that additional stuff. You don't necessarily, the barrier to entry is a lot lower, I think, than what most people would maybe think initially of how this guy created this YouTube channel. Well, you started with simply with an iPhone, then kind of morphed into something much more. And so I think it's within the realm of possibility for most people to sort of replicate that model to some extent.
I think so. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, because initially I didn't spend anything. I think I maybe spent like $5 or $10 on like a very cheap tripod for my iPhone just to like stand it up. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to spend a ton of money up front. But yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing is, especially today, it's like you can usually monetize stuff like at a certain point. And even if you don't make enough to live off of, you can still usually make enough to pay for the hobby for sure.
When you look at most individuals who have kind of grown a business, that's how they start, right? They start as a hobby. They know it's not making money, but they started as a hobby, and all of a sudden they've figure out a way to monetize it. And then they do start making money and they're covering their costs. And then they up their game a little bit and now they are making money. And then eventually they figure out a way to actually turn it into a full-time income. And for some people, that is a really quick process because maybe they have some insight on how to do it, or they have years of experience, or they have tangential experience. Maybe it's something similar to what they are doing in their own job, and so they can move a lot of those skills in, or they have family support, right? But no matter who we are, it's always this kind of the same process. We have to learn, we have to have some sort of investment, we have to figure out how to monetize it, and then we have to figure out how to grow that.
Right. No, totally. I mean, that's totally the thing. And I think it's also important, kind of sort of related to like the time aspect. I think it's also important to remember just that time is a really valuable thing too. And so, I mean, obviously, like, it depends totally on a person's situation. Sometimes time is more accessible than money, and sometimes money is more accessible than time. So it's like, I mean, for me, I think like I personally like editing. I like spending time on, all of the kind of nit gritty stuff of it. But, for somebody that maybe doesn't like doing editing or, whatever, it might cost a bit of time up front for them to have to edit. But if they get to a point where they can monetize it, they might be able to, for example, pay for an editor. So, and that can save them, the time that they would have spent editing. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's also kind of another thing to think about too, is just like, you might be spending a bit more time on it early on, though if you like it and it's a hobby, that probably doesn't matter much. But like, eventually you can get to a point where like, you don't have to, you can spend less time on it, even if you are spending a little bit more money on it, which is valuable, I think, in and of itself.
Yeah, that was a process that we went through with this podcast. I mean, if you go back and you listen to basically the first year of episodes, so probably the first 40 or 50 episodes.
Recorded from our kitchen.
They were recorded in our kitchen with one microphone, and I was doing the editing, and I'll just say this, it was shitty editing. I mean, obviously I was, and this is something that someone told us a long time ago. They said, don't try to learn it all right away, because one, you might learn something but not be able to implement it all. And two, you're going to lose some of it along the way if you're not using it. So they just said every week, learn one new thing and add that into your editing functionality. And so it slowly got better, but we also then got to a point where we were able to monetize. And for those of you who don't necessarily understand that word monetize, it's just basically a way to make money off of. Your business is making money. And so once you're making that money, when we started, we then hired somebody to do the editing because we wanted to free ourselves up to do other things that we enjoyed more or that would add value to the podcast.
Thank you, Tim.
Right.
Tim is our editor. Right. So how long did it, I guess I got two questions then for you to sort of follow up with that. How long did it take until you were able to generate some money? And how exactly do you make money on YouTube?
So it took me, let's see. So I really started my channel as it was in like May of 2019. And I think around then I got like 100 something subscribers. And like the thing with YouTube is you can't even monetize until, so first of all, I guess I'll explain how monetization works on YouTube. So the way you monetize on YouTube is through ads. So like you can turn on ads on a video, and as long as your video meets the criteria for, advertisers, you'll have ads placed on your video. And when people watch them, depending on the niche, you'll make a certain amount per view. And then that obviously aggregates into a certain amount that you make for that video just for its entire life. And so the YouTube, they got really strict with who can monetize. I think it was in 2018 or 2019. They really cracked down and they said that you could only monetize your channel if you were a creator with 1,000 or more subscribers and if you had 4,000 hours of watch time within the last 365 days. And so I wasn't even able to monetize until that point. And I hit that point at the end of December of 2019. And so I would say, for the first I guess it would have been like 8 months, 7 months. Like I wasn't making anything from it. And then it was just end of last year end of last year when I was finally approved for it. And that's when I started putting ads on my videos. And then there's also there are other ways you can do like affiliate links. So the way that works is you'll maybe mention some products or something in your video, and you'll say like, yeah, I have links for these products down below, and you can actually create affiliate links. And they're basically, I mean, it's basically kind of a form of advertising because it's like you're directing traffic to like a certain product on a certain website. And so you can get affiliate links so they can actually trace that back to you. And then they'll give you a small cut of how much revenue you generate from those links. So like, it's usually like pretty low. It's like 2.5 or 5% of the overall purchase, but it's still something, and it doesn't cost the person buying the stuff any money. It's just a cut from the company's profit. So that's another way. There's also, obviously you can do merch, like you can sell your own stuff. I haven't done that. And then there's also like crowdfunding. So like you can do things like Patreon, which that is something I have. I have a Patreon. And so those are all kind of just different ways you can generate revenue streams. You can also, if you're trying to build like an actual business where you're selling a product like a course or like just something specific, you can also kind of create sort of a sales funnel with your channel and like use your channel as the means of promoting that product. And then, you kind of slowly try to redirect traffic down that funnel. So then maybe you get them to join your email subscriber list. So then you try to get them to join your website. And then at the end, you kind of give them a pitch and you're like, hey, like, do you want to buy this course? And that is also another way people will make a lot of money on YouTube is they'll have a product that they're selling for a very niche audience, and they'll use their channel to sort of like funnel traffic into that product to buy. And so, yeah, those are a few of the ways. I don't really do the last approach just because I don't really have a product, but yeah, those are all different avenues you can go down.
So that's very interesting. And so you touched on the sort of, in order to even start doing advertising or implement, including ads in your content, you had to sort of reach certain benchmarks with YouTube, getting so many hours of watch time in the last 365 days, having so many followers. How exactly did you grow your following?
So, I mean, I think for me, it was just, I think I stayed kind of within a niche. So that's a pretty important thing early on, especially is creating content that really caters to a specific audience. And the thing is some of this, it's kind of tricky because there is a certain element of like randomness. And then there's also just the black box of the YouTube recommendation algorithm, because it's going to have all of its kind of own behavior based on how viewers on YouTube are acting. So like you have no control over that as like a creator. But like, there are best practices. You try to optimize your videos so that they're really searchable. So like that involves doing like research and SEO, like trying to make sure that you're really, optimizing for keywords that don't have a lot of competition, but that have a reasonable amount of volume. And there's a lot of technical detail you can go into with all of those things. But yeah, I think the main thing is trying to focus in on a topic or like a niche. And that is, I think, why my audience kind of started to grow, is because I was talking about like gay issues in a very particular way. And I think, yeah, there was like an audience for that. And so I think focusing on like a specific topic is probably the most important thing you can do. And I also think too, just kind of, it's a little bit of a waiting game early on too, right? Because just to give like kind of a sort of perspective on my channel, like I think like last year, like in the summer, I was generating maybe 100, like maybe a few hundred views every week, like at most. Like I think it was not very much at all. And it kind of just slowly like snowballs a little bit. And yeah, so early on, I wasn't getting a lot of traffic. And then towards the end of the year, I was getting a bit more. And then I was getting a bit more later. And then I had a really big spike of traffic in May. It's kind of tapered off, but it's still grown relative to where it was even several months ago. So I think some of it's also just patience as well. And just kind of, yeah, those are kind of a couple of things, I guess, is focusing on a niche and kind of also realizing that it does take a little time to get substantial traffic, to get the 1,000 subscribers and to hit all the benchmarks and stuff.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it aligns with, not exactly, but similar experiences that David and I have had. But you touched on the need to have a niche. And as you were talking about that, it reminded me, a couple of months ago, maybe it was even a year ago, I can't remember, but all the social media platforms in an effort to sort of minimize hate speech and to shut down fake news, they sort of did some overcorrection where, specifically with YouTube, if I remember correctly, they were sort of thwarting the algorithms or traffic for anything that was gay or LGBT related, almost like the word gay couldn't be used in a positive way. The word LGBTQ or queer couldn't be said in a positive context. So that was thwarting some of the traffic that I know that LGBTQ bloggers and vloggers were getting. Did you experience that? And if so, how did you overcome that?
that was a little bit before, I guess, my time. Like, I think I was still creating during that time, but I didn't have enough traffic to really know an impact. Like, it's hard for me to know. It's like, is it just because no one's watching my stuff, or is it because like I'm being affected by this thing? So I don't really know. I didn't experience that personally, but yeah, I think that they have had issues in the past where they've been too strict on keywords. But I do think, at least, you know, now, like since I've been monetized, at least, and based on my traffic, like my channel's traffic and growth, like I haven't personally observed any sort of like anomaly there. I haven't, and most of my videos, like I have videos that are demonetized because I talk about more, I guess you could say, like personal issues or whatever. But like, yeah, I haven't really experienced that when I just talk about like gay or LGBT issues. But I also kind of started getting in the game, I think, when a lot of that stuff had already been at its worst. So yeah, I haven't experienced it too much.
So you mentioned this idea of the waiting game. So let me ask you, what did you do? Because I think most of us, when we start doing something, you know, we want that success and we want to see that 1,000 followers or million views or whatever, and we want it to happen yesterday, right? What did you do? And it can actually really drag you down emotionally, right? You can use it as a way to really go into a negative place because you start to get to this, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, nobody likes me, all those kinds of comments. What did you do to avoid that and just say, I'm going to ride this out?
So, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So, I mean, I guess to be clear, I mean, there were definitely times when I felt that way, right? Like, I mean, there were definitely times when I was like, gosh, you know, there's no reason people want to watch this. I'm not good at this, you know, those sorts of things. I think that's really normal. And so I definitely had those. But I think what helped me, there's a lot of things. I think one of the things is like, first of all, not benchmarking myself against like some sort of expectation that I already have or some sort of, you know, how other people are doing, right? Because if you look at a channel that already has like a huge audience, it's like, you're not going to compete with them at the beginning. You just can't, because they've been in the game for several years probably. And YouTube, just by its nature, it really favors creators that have a large audience already. Like, I mean, it very, very much favors those creators. And so I think it's good to have perspective and just realize like, okay, well, I'm just starting this. So, I mean, it's not going to be good. I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I'm also like, it just takes time to build trust with people and to get visibility. The other thing too, for me, was just, I don't know. I think there's a certain level of like trying to like sort of remove, and I don't know, it's hard to say this because it's like, I think it's good to strive personally for things. And I think you have to, but I think a certain amount of like removing like your ego from it and not so much like, you know, not having personal investment in it, but kind of trying to remember like, what's the thing like that you're really pushing for here, right? Like, what is the goal here? Because like for me, like my goal was to talk about things that I didn't feel like were talked about enough and to help people who maybe were having similar experiences as me. And I did see I was impacting those people, right? Like there were people even in the beginning that would comment and be like, wow, this was really helpful. And sure, it was only like 3 or 4 in the beginning, but it was still, I mean, those are real people. And so I think that's another part of it, is realizing like the impact you are having, and also like kind of remembering that it's just making sure, I guess, that like your ego and like sort of the sense of vanity don't get too wrapped up in like your perceived success. And I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess those are a couple of things that I found helpful for me. And I mean, it's not like a cut and dry, like you just figure it out and you stop caring. I mean, I still struggle with these things. Like I still have moments where I'm like, gosh, why did this video not do well? Or like, why, like I spent all this time on this, why is this not doing well? But I think it's good to just try to recenter yourself by thinking about some of those aspects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. I think it's important to have perspective. And those are all things I think are ways for you to remember and have that kind of perspective, that there's lots of different factors as to why you don't have instant success. Right.
One thing I'll say too is like, I know for me too, I mean, just as a side note, it might be personality trait, but I tend to be kind of stubborn with stuff too. Like I tend to be very much the type where like, I want to figure it out. If I have a goal, like I want to like get it, if that makes sense. And I do think that is another part of it as well. Is just, I think for me, I can get kind of stubbornly set on doing something. Yeah, I think just having the grit, I guess, to do that and to kind of maybe get a little stubborn, not that you don't learn, but just trying to kind of just persist. And knowing that like it'll work out, I think is helpful too. But anyway, sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, that's fine. I think that word tenacious, right? Having tenacity is vitally important for anyone who wants to have any form of success. You have to continue and you have to try again and try again and try again. So One of the things that seems to be, I think, of a lot of interest for folks is the variety of topics that you have. You have so many different topics on your channel. What path do you go down? Are there favorite topics that you have? This is the kind of the way the juicy stuff, right? I mean, this is where you get to have fun, or you get to make a statement, or you get to piss people off, or what? How do you do that? Not the piss people off part.
Well, how do you pick your topics exactly, and what What seems to resonate most with your audience?
So it's kind of weird. So right now I'm kind of in this interesting place where I'm kind of figuring out like how much of different topics I want to include. I've been experimenting with like kind of vlogging videos lately because people have asked me to do that, and so I try to respond to feedback. And there have been people in my audience that like are very consistent, and they're really supportive and really great. And they've asked, try doing vlogs. We want to see more of just kind of who you are. And so one aspect of it, I think, is just listening to your audience and taking feedback, but not everyone, right? Like there's really a core of your audience that you'll probably start to recognize as you're doing like a channel or something where they're consistently coming to your content. And I feel like that's the group of people that at least I really focus on, because I focused on every random person that left a mean comment or told me they hated this or that. It's like I delete everything. You know what I mean? So I think that's one thing, is just seeing kind of the core audience and responding to their feedback. But for me, I mean, a lot of my topics too, though, it's like shower thoughts, I guess. I don't know, I tend to have, I guess I just think about these kinds of things a lot, not even just LGBT, but I tend to just think about issues like that. And it's a blessing and it's a curse, I guess, because on the one hand, it's obviously good because I feel like I have things to talk about and ideas about things, but at the same time, I think it can come with not always knowing when to turn my brain off with that stuff. But yeah, for me, a lot of it's just I'll have an experience with somebody, or I'll have a series of experiences with different people, and I just kind of see this thread between them, or this pattern between them. Just an example, right? Whenever I would go to clubs, for example, back whenever I was a cool kid and did that, I would go to clubs. And it was interesting because something I noticed when I first started going was there were certain people I felt that would get all of the attention. I mean, this is a really basic example, but I noticed certain types of guys it felt would get a lot of attention. It would be guys who were either in really good shape and just kind of, the Ken doll type, or just very handsome, or it would be straight guys, quote unquote, or maybe actually straight guys that were there with their girlfriend or something. I felt they were the ones that would get a lot of attention. And then I found in my own experience too, that whenever I started working out a lot and I saw some changes in, I guess, how my body looked, I noticed that I got more attention from that. Right. And it just kind of got me thinking. I was how important is this really? How much value is really put on the way your body looks? Why is that such a thing? And is it just a matter of oh, we're sexually empowered and we just, we're not afraid to show what we like? Or is there something else going on here too? And then that kind of led me into just a dive of body shame and issues around body image and how that stuff plays out for gay men specifically. I think I have a video that talks about that topic. It's one of my earlier topics, but that's kind of an example, right? It's I just kind of see different things and I sort of pick out a thread and I make a video about it. So I think that's another way. It's just drawing from my own experiences, I guess.
So it sounds like it's as much cathartic as it is a hobby.
It is. Oh, for sure. I mean, because, and I think what you said earlier too about, feeling like you have a voice, I think that was a big driver for me too. And it continues to be, is just, you see these things and you feel like you want them to be talked about. You want to have a conversation about them. And I think that can really be a driver too, is just wanting people to hear about this thing that you feel like you see from your perspective that maybe other people aren't seeing in the same way. And I think we all have our own unique things that we see, right, that are worth, creating around. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, so it may be that you don't even necessarily want to start a business or monetize anything. Hopefully you at least want to sort of cover your costs, but maybe it's more about just strengthening your voice, figuring out better what your perspective is, or at least the best way to sort of articulate that. So when you go out to the community, to society, to your workplace, you can sort of articulate that better or represent that better.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it for sure. Yeah, I think that's true. I would say that's probably my bigger motivator in it, more than it being a business. I think it would be cool one day to make it something that I could subsist on by itself. But yeah, I think at least right now, I guess the focus still is more on kind of having ways to articulate things.
So someday it'll be starring Jacob, Michael, and Oprah Winfrey.
No, I don't think that. I doubt that. But
So if someone wants to follow in your footsteps, what would you say are maybe the first 2 or 3 steps that you would suggest that they take?
yeah, that's a good question. So I guess the first step is just trying it out. I mean, I think that in my opinion, I think it's good to try to avoid what I call or what is called analysis paralysis. Like if you have an idea or you have an inkling about creating something and it's within your means, I don't see any reason not to. I think you should just do it before you can talk yourself out of doing it. So I would say it's probably the first step. And I mean, I guess the second step is just obviously making sure, I mean, I guess if you don't have all the equipment, all the things you need, like making sure you have that. And then I guess the third step would just be to persist. I guess that would be the third step would be just to persist and just to kind of keep doing it. And obviously, like if you realize, oh, this isn't for me, like I just don't like this just for its own sake, then maybe dropping it, because I don't think there's any harm in dropping it. But yeah, I mean, I think those would be the first 3 steps,
Nice.
just doing it, getting what you need and persisting.
Well, I think this has been super insightful and inspiring, and it seems like we have a lot of overlap in our experiences and our perspectives somewhat. Where can our listeners follow or find you? Clearly on YouTube.
Yeah, they can find me. So I'm just, my YouTube name is Jacob Michael. So yeah, you can find it on YouTube search, or I think if you go to youtube.com/Jacob Michael, my channel should be the one that comes up. And then yeah, on Instagram, you can find me. It's Jacob M. Michael is my handle. And it's the same on Twitter. So yeah, those are the channels that I can be found at.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really good talk.
Likewise. Thank you for listening to another episode of Queer Money. Here's your Queer Money takeaway from this episode. If you're thinking about starting your own business, a more public hobby, or becoming a content creator online, just start. Try it, see if you like it, and go from there. We make the Queer Money podcast for you, so please email your money questions to questions@debtfreeguys.com or post your questions in the Queer Money Facebook group, and we may answer your question in an upcoming episode. Thank you very much.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. Capital One's checking and savings accounts have no fees and no minimums. And with one of the best saving rates in America, you can rest easy watching your money grow with no fees to bring you down. You can open an account in about 5 minutes, which means you are only about 5 minutes away from getting your savings to grow with one of the nation's best rates.
Commit, trim, lasso, automate, monitor. That's the Debt Lasso method, and it's helped pay off over $250,000 in credit card debt in less than 2 years so far. See what it'll do for you by getting your free Debt Lasso calculator at debtlasso.com.